The village carried its secrets like scars, hidden beneath laughter, buried under the rhythm of daily life, but never forgotten. At dawn, when women fetched water from the river, they would lower their voices to a murmur, as though even the wind should not hear the words. At night, when children asked why certain families never joined the dances at festivals, why some faces looked strangely pale no matter how the sun burned on their skin, the elders would hush them quickly. Do not ask. Do not speak of the clay. For it was said that long ago, the clay that was meant to shame one girl had become the stain of many. They whispered of the families who still scrubbed their faces raw until their skin bled, yet the white streaks clung stubbornly as if carved into their very flesh. Some wore veils now, others kept to their houses, afraid of the stares that followed them. But the truth lingered in every glance, in every silence that filled the village square when they passed. They were descendants of the cruel ones, the people who had smeared a girl's face with white clay to humiliate her. The story, as the elders told it in hushed tones, began at a festival. A time when all painted their faces in patterns of red, black, and yellow earth, honoring ancestors and spirits. But for her, one girl, innocent and kind, the festival became a trial of cruelty. White clay was pressed against her skin, thick and unyielding, meant not as decoration but as a brand. White was the color of impurity, of shame, of those cast out. They dragged her before the crowd, laughing as the bright drums pounded and children pointed. But what was done in mockery returned as a curse. For when the girl fled to the river, tears mixing with the clay, the earth itself seemed to stir. The clay did not wash away as they expected. Instead, the river carried her pain and turned it back upon those who had caused it. One by one, their own faces grew pale, streaked with the same white clay they had smeared on her. They scrubbed until their skin blistered. They prayed to spirits, they begged for forgiveness. But the clay clung fast, marking them as cruel hearts, as hands that had harmed. Generations passed, yet the marks endured. Some say the clay was no longer physical but spiritual, passed down through bloodlines, a reminder that cruelty never vanishes, that shame clings to those who create it. Others believe the clay was literal, that even now, in the dead of night, when the moon is sharp and bright, you can see it shining faintly on their faces, glowing like a ghostly mask. And so, the story lived on. Children grew up afraid of white clay, mothers avoided touching it during rituals, and families bore the weight of their ancestors' cruelty like chains. But always at the heart of the legend was the girl herself. The girl who should have been broken, but whose suffering turned into a judgment that could never be washed away. The girl who would one day be whispered of in legend was not born of shadow or cruelty. She was born of light. Her name carried the memory of her mother, a woman remembered for laughter that rang across courtyards and for hands that healed the sick with herbs and songs. When her mother died, the village mourned, but none more than the little girl left behind. In time, her father remarried, and though the child welcomed her new family with open arms, they never returned her kindness in kind. Even so, she grew into a young woman whose spirit could not be crushed. She moved through the village like a small sun, warming every heart she passed. Her smile was a thing of gentleness, and her words carried a tenderness that made people pause in the midst of their burdens. When old men sat weary from toil, she carried water to them. When children scraped their knees, she knelt to bind them with strips of cloth. And when quarrels broke out in the marketplace, it was often her voice, soft and steady, that restored calm. The villagers began to call her their gentle daughter. She was not theirs by blood, but by the affection she inspired. They said she reminded them that goodness had not vanished from the world, that even when droughts came or fevers spread, there was still a light worth protecting. But not all saw her with love. Her stepmother, who had long harbored bitterness in her heart, saw only competition in the girl's beauty. Where others praised the young woman's grace, she saw a reminder of her own fading youth. And where others cherished her kindness, the stepmother saw weakness, a softness she despised. Her own daughter, the girl's stepsister, absorbed this bitterness like water soaking into dry ground. She, too, grew to resent the gentle daughter, not only for her beauty but for the love the village gave her freely, love she herself never earned. The stepmother's house became a place of quiet cruelty. Tasks were heaped upon the gentle daughter's shoulders, endless sweeping, endless fetching of water, endless hours bent over fire or loom. And when she finished, more was demanded. If ever she faltered, sharp words lashed at her like whips. Yet she bore it all with quiet dignity. When her hands blistered, she wrapped them and worked on. When her back ached from carrying wood, she stood straighter and carried again. And when her stepsister mocked her, calling her servant, sneering at her plain clothes, she only smiled as though cruelty could not take root in her heart. At night, when the house grew quiet, she would slip outside to sit by the river. The moonlight caught the braids of her hair, making them shine like threads of night spun with silver. There, away from eyes that sought to wound her, she whispered prayers to her mother, hoping her spirit still lingered among the stars. The villagers, seeing her by the riverbank or in the marketplace, began to tell one another, "Her strength is not in her hands nor in her beauty but in her spirit. Nothing seems to break her." And so she became, without knowing it, a symbol. For widows grieving, she was proof that pain could be endured. For young girls dreaming of love, she was proof that dignity did not need wealth or fine clothing. For men burdened by toil, she was proof that gentleness had power. But symbols invite envy as much as admiration. Her stepmother's jealousy deepened into venom. Her stepsister's envy twisted into malice. They whispered together in dark corners of the house, their eyes sharp as knives whenever they watched her. The girl, in her innocence, did not notice the danger gathering around her. She believed kindness was strong enough to soften cruelty. She believed family could not truly turn against its own. She was wrong. The gentle daughter had survived hardship, and she had endured cruelty. But soon she would face something far greater, a humiliation meant to break her completely. For envy, when it festers too long, demands not only to wound but to destroy. And so the village's light, their gentle daughter, walked each day with warmth in her heart, never suspecting how near the shadows had drawn. Envy does not announce itself at first. It creeps like roots beneath the soil, unseen but spreading, feeding on small grievances until it chokes out all else. In the household of the gentle daughter, envy thrived. At first it was the whispers of villagers that stirred it. "She is her mother's child," they said, nodding at the young woman with fondness. "Graceful, humble, and strong." Whenever the girl carried baskets for the elders or soothed a crying child, the words followed, "Kind, lovely, blessed." They meant no harm in their praise, but every word was a thorn in the stepmother's pride. The stepmother, who had once enjoyed admiration for her beauty, felt her mirror turn cruel as the years went by. Each wrinkle, each strand of gray hair reminded her that her time in the sun had passed. And when she saw suitors pause at her gate, it was not for her or her own daughter, it was for the gentle one. The stepsister too felt the sting. She had grown up with the expectation that she would be cherished, admired, and chosen. But whenever she walked beside her stepsister, she noticed how eyes slid past her and lingered on the other. Even the elders whose blessings she sought would say, "Learn from your sister. She is wise beyond her years." The words festered. Praise for one became poison for the other. At first the cruelty was small. A task doubled, a portion of food withheld, a scornful laugh when the girl wore her simple clothes. The gentle daughter endured it silently, never once speaking ill of them. But her silence only made their envy grow sharper. To the stepmother and her daughter, her patience looked like arrogance, as though she believed herself better than them. The true turning point came on a day of gathering. Villagers had come together to celebrate the harvest, their voices bright with songs. Young men competed in games of strength, and maidens carried baskets of fruit to the feast. When the gentle daughter appeared, carrying little more than a jug of water, she drew admiration as though she bore jewels. One of the elders stopped her. "Child, you are a blessing to this village. May your kindness return to you 100-fold." Others echoed the sentiment. Even a few of the young men, strong and eager from the contests, smiled shyly in her direction. The stepsister stood nearby, unseen. The words fell on her like coals. That night she raged to her mother. "Why do they never see me? Why do they never praise me? I am the one who should be admired, not her." Her stepmother, her heart already twisted with jealousy, soothed her daughter with venom. "It is because she makes herself look humble and the fools believe it is goodness. But she is nothing. We will remind her of her place." Together they began to scheme. The stepmother's mind was sharp with bitterness, and she understood the power of shame. If the villagers admire her so, then let us give them a reason to turn away. Let us stain her name so that no one will look at her with love again. The stepsister's eyes gleamed with cruel delight. "Yes, let us disgrace her. Let them see her for what she truly is, weak, broken, and unworthy." They whispered late into the night, their plan growing darker with every word. It would not be enough to burden her with chores or to mock her in the privacy of their home. No, they wanted the village to see her fall. They wanted her light dimmed, her dignity stripped, until admiration turned to scorn. The gentle daughter, sleeping in her corner, stirred only faintly when their laughter echoed through the house. She did not know that seeds had been sown in the soil of resentment. She did not know that envy had blossomed into a plan that would mark the beginning of her deepest suffering. What she did know was this: the air in her own home had grown heavier. The stepmother's eyes lingered on her longer, sharper. The stepsister's tone grew sharper, her words edged with something more than mockery. She sensed the change, though she could not yet name it. In the village, life went on. The gentle daughter continued her daily kindness, and the villagers continued to admire her. But behind closed doors, resentment smoldered like embers waiting for wind. And soon that wind would come. The festival of clay was the brightest day in the village calendar. Once a year the earth itself was honored. Clay from riverbeds, hillsides and sacred groves was gathered, ground and colored with herbs, roots and ash. Men, women and children painted their faces and arms with swirling patterns that told stories. Spirals for the rivers, lines for the winds, dots for the stars. It was said that when the village painted itself with the soil, the ancestors looked down and saw their children as part of the land once more. The gentle daughter had always loved the festival. Even as she stood in the background watching others dance, her heart swelled with the joy of drums, flutes and voices rising together. But this year she felt uneasy. For weeks she had noticed her stepmother's gaze linger on her, calculating and cold. The stepsister too had grown restless, whispering and smirking whenever the villagers praised her. On the morning of the festival, the stepmother's voice rang sharp. "You will not wear the colors of the rivers or the stars," she said. "You are not fit to stand among them in beauty." The gentle daughter lowered her eyes. "But the clay is for everyone, mother. It is the ancestors' gift." Her stepmother's lips curled into a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Yes, for everyone. But you, child, will wear this." From a jar she drew thick, chalk-white clay, plain and stark. Unlike the vibrant reds, browns and blacks used by the villagers, this clay was the color of bones, of ash after fire. It was not used for festival patterns, it was used for graves, for washing the dead. Among the people, white clay marked impurity and loss. The stepsister clapped her hands in glee. "Yes, let her be painted like a ghost. Let all who see her know she does not belong among us." The gentle daughter felt her chest tighten, but she did not resist. She had endured so much already: harsh words, cruel chores and scornful laughter. Perhaps this too she could endure. Yet a tremor of dread passed through her as her stepmother smeared the clay across her cheeks, her forehead, her chin. Cold, wet, heavy, it sank into her skin as though the earth itself pressed down on her. When the family arrived at the festival, the villagers' joy dimmed. Laughter faltered, music stumbled. People turned to look, first with surprise, then with unease. "Why is she painted so?" whispered one woman. "Is it mockery?" asked another. "Or has she done something to deserve it?" The stepmother raised her voice as if she had waited for this moment. "She wears the white clay because her heart is not clean. Let the ancestors see her as she is, a stain upon this village." The stepsister added with a cruel smile, "She brings shame to our house, so she will carry it on her skin." The gentle daughter stood still, her face burning beneath the cold clay. She wanted to speak, to tell them she had done no wrong. But her voice caught in her throat. Around her, the villagers' eyes shifted. Some pitied her, but fear and gossip moved quicker than compassion. If her own family condemned her, perhaps there was truth to it? Few dared to defend her. The festival carried on, but the drums beat strangely hollow to her ears. Children danced with bright red and black patterns on their cheeks. Elders traced lines of story across their arms. Lovers leaned close, admiring the symbols each had chosen. And she stood apart, painted like a corpse among the living. Yet as the day wore on, something strange began to happen. The white clay, meant as a mark of shame, seemed to glimmer faintly under the sun. At first it was only a trick of the light, a shimmer like dew. But as the drums grew louder and the dancers spun faster, the clay on her face reflected the firelight of the torches, glowing with a pale brilliance. Children gasped. "Look," one cried. "She shines." The stepmother frowned, grabbing the girl's arm to pull her away, but it was too late. More villagers had noticed. The white clay no longer looked like ash or death. It looked like stone polished by rivers, like the luminous shells found deep in caves. Uneasy murmurs spread. Some remembered old stories. That white clay, when given by the earth itself, was not a mark of impurity but of transformation. The soil of graves could also be the soil of rebirth. The stepsister's smile faltered. The stepmother's face hardened. "Do not be fooled," she snapped. "It is nothing but dirt." She spat into her palm and rubbed at the girl's cheek, trying to smear it away. But the clay would not move. It clung fast to the girl's skin, and when the stepmother's hand pulled back, a faint streak of white remained on her own fingers. She tried to wipe it away, but the streak only spread across her hand like frost. The gentle daughter did not fight, did not speak. She only lowered her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. And where the tears touched, the clay glowed brighter, as if her sorrow itself made it shine. The festival ended in uneasy silence. Laughter had died, songs had faltered. The villagers went home with whispers on their lips, that shame had turned to light, that cruelty had called down a curse. And though the stepmother scrubbed her skin raw that night, the white would not fade from her fingers. The first seed of the legend had been planted. The drums had stopped by the time they dragged her forward. The festival square, once filled with laughter and song, had grown thick with unease. Torches burned high, their smoke coiling into the night sky, but the brightest flame was the one of curiosity, the villagers' eyes fixed on the young woman smeared in white. Her stepmother's grip was iron, fingers digging into her arm. Her stepsister trailed behind, holding another pot of the pale clay, her face twisted into a grin that fed on cruelty. Together they pulled the girl into the center of the square. "There," the stepmother declared, her voice rising sharp as a blade. "See what impurity looks like when revealed. This is no daughter of honor. This is a disgrace." The stepsister dipped her hands into the jar and slapped thick layers of clay across the girl's arms and shoulders. The cool weight pressed heavy against her skin, covering her until she seemed more statue than human. With each smear, the laughter of the crowd grew louder. "Look at her," one man jeered. "Ghost child," shouted another. "She will bring famine to our fields if she walks among us," a woman cried. Children, emboldened by their parents, pointed and laughed, their small voices joining the cruel chorus. The girl trembled, her body shivering under the weight of shame. Her tears welled, hot against the cold clay, slipping down her cheeks in clear streaks that carved fragile rivers across the mask of white. For every tear that fell, the clay beneath seemed to glisten, but the crowd did not notice. They only saw weakness. "Why do you weep?" mocked her stepsister. "Is the mask too heavy? Or is it that the world finally sees you as you are?" The stepmother raised her chin proudly. "Let her shame be our protection. Let no suitor, no elder, no child be fooled by her false kindness. She wears the truth now, painted by the earth itself." A roar of laughter followed, cruel and echoing. The girl lowered her gaze, her body trembling, but inside her, something different stirred. She remembered the ancestors her mother once told her of, remembered the stories of the earth that sheltered the lost and gave roots to the broken. Her stepmother's words sliced, but they did not destroy. She did not fight back. She did not shout. She only stood, small, silent, and unyielding, as the insults rained down. Yet even in their frenzy some villagers faltered. An old woman in the crowd whispered, "This is not right. She has harmed no one." A younger man frowned. Why such cruelty at a festival meant for joy? But their voices were drowned beneath the tide of mockery. The stepmother had chosen her moment well, when the village was drunk on spectacle and eager for someone to bear their scorn. At last, the stepmother clapped her hands, signaling her victory. "Enough. Let her stand here as night falls. Let her wear the clay until the moon sees her shame." The crowd began to disperse, laughter still lingering like smoke. But as they left, many stole glances back, at the girl standing pale and still, her tears catching the torchlight, making her face shimmer strangely. The stepsister lingered one last time, leaning close to hiss in her ear. "Tomorrow no one will remember your kindness. They will only remember this, your face smeared with dirt." Then they left her. Alone. The square emptied, the drums silenced, and she stood with the clay drying, tightening, cracking on her skin. Her heart pounded, but she did not collapse. Her tears continued to fall, tracing lines of light in the clay until her face seemed almost to glow. She whispered into the darkness, her voice shaking but steady, "If this clay is meant to shame me, then let it be my shield. If these tears are meant to weaken me, then let them carve my truth. Ancestors, do not leave me." The night air shifted. The torches flickered though no wind blew. A silence deeper than silence filled the square, and though no one remained to hear it, the earth seemed to listen. What the stepmother and stepsister thought was humiliation had planted something far stronger, an unseen seed of power waiting to grow. The night pressed close as she stumbled from the festival square, the clay cracking and flaking against her skin. The torches behind her dwindled to pinpricks, and the laughter that had once surrounded her faded into memory. Only the sound of her own breath remained, ragged, uneven, yet determined. She did not know where her feet carried her, only that she could not remain beneath their eyes. Through the narrow paths she pushed into the forest, branches scraping her arms, leaves brushing against the thick coat of white. The clay itched, tightened, hardened until her every movement felt bound by its weight. Yet still she pressed forward, driven by something deeper than pride, something ancient. At last she reached the river. Its waters glimmered under the half-moon, quiet and silver as if waiting just for her. She fell to her knees at the bank, her reflection staring back, ghostly, unfamiliar, hollowed by shame. For the first time that night sobs tore free. She plunged her hands into the water, scrubbing furiously, desperate to rid herself of the humiliation smeared upon her. The clay dissolved in cloudy streaks, floating downstream like smoke breaking apart in wind. She splashed her face again and again until her skin burned, until she could no longer tell if the dampness on her cheeks was river water or tears. When at last she stilled, chest heaving, she lay down on the cool earth. The forest's chorus, crickets, owls, rustling leaves, rose like a lullaby. Exhaustion pulled her under. She drifted into sleep by the river's edge, her wet hair fanned out like dark threads in the moonlight. In her dreams she was not alone. A low hum vibrated through the earth, soft but resonant, like a drum buried deep beneath soil. The darkness parted and figures emerged, shadows woven from starlight, faces etched with wisdom and sorrow. They were neither wholly human nor spirit, but something beyond, shimmering like flame and water together. "My child," one voice murmured as soft as wind through reeds. "Why do you bow your head in shame?" She lifted her eyes, her voice breaking. "They painted me with clay to mock me. They laughed, they jeered. I carry their scorn still. I do not know how to walk with such weight." Another figure stepped forward, eyes like molten stone. "The clay they smeared was meant to break you, but clay is of the earth, and the earth does not serve cruelty. Do you not see? What they gave you was not shame, it was a mark, a bond. And now it binds them." Confused, she touched her face in the dream. "Binds them? They thought to stain you, but the stain has turned against them," whispered a third, her voice like running water. "The earth remembers cruelty. It will cling to their hands, their faces, their very breath. They cannot wash away what they have done, for the clay is alive, and it has chosen its truth." The girl's heart beat faster, fear and awe mingling. "But what of me? Will I be remembered only as the mocked one, the shamed?" The first voice rose stronger now, filling her chest with warmth. "No. You will be remembered as the vessel of transformation. From pain comes power. From their mockery comes their curse. Walk not in despair, child. Walk in knowing, you carry the eyes of your ancestors with you. Their cruelty cannot define you. It will define only them." The dream pulsed with color, white clay glowing bright, then shattering into shards of light that scattered into the stars. She saw visions of her stepmother scrubbing her face raw, the white streaks never leaving. She saw her stepsister's hands, pale and marred, as if dipped in chalk that no water could cleanse. She saw the villagers whispering in fear, pointing not at her but at those who had cast the first stone. When she woke, dawn was rising over the river. The air was fresh, crisp with birdsong. Her face felt cool, clean, as though the river had not only washed her skin but also lifted the weight from her heart. She touched her reflection again. The clay was gone, but in her eyes lingered something new, a brightness, a strength. She rose slowly, brushing dirt and leaves from her dress, and whispered toward the trees, "I hear you. I will carry your words." The forest seemed to stir in reply. The river glimmered once more. And somewhere, back in the village, the first screams of confusion were beginning. Her stepmother scrubbing her cheeks, her stepsister staring in horror at her pale streaked hands. The curse had begun its work. The girl turned from the river and walked deeper into the forest, her footsteps light but steady. She was no longer running from shame. She was walking toward destiny. The first shriek came with the rising sun. At the edge of the village, where the huts clustered close together, a woman bent over a clay basin of water, scrubbing her cheeks until her skin grew raw. Yet the streaks remained, long pale lines crawling across her face as though painted in the night. The harder she rubbed, the brighter the clay seemed to shine, glistening against her dark skin like frost that refused to melt. "Off! Get off!" she wailed, drawing the attention of her neighbors. They gathered around, frowning, murmuring. One man leaned close to peer at her skin, then recoiled. "It will not come away," he whispered. "The clay clings to her as if it lives." Within an hour the whispers spread like wildfire. Others emerged from their homes, faces marked in similar ways, cheeks, brows, hands, even the folds of their palms smeared with stubborn white. Some bore faint streaks, others blotches so stark it looked as though their flesh itself had turned to chalk. The more they tried to wash, the more the clay seemed to sink in, as though it had fused with their very being. By mid-morning, panic filled the air. Women ran to the riverbanks, plunging their faces into the current, holding their breath until their lungs burned. Men clawed at their skin with ash, sand, leaves, anything rough enough to scrape. The children cried, afraid of their mothers' distorted faces, and clung to fathers who bore streaks of their own. The village square became a hive of fear. Buckets of water were hauled in, herbs were crushed and smeared over skin, prayers were chanted aloud. Elders commanded silence, then muttered frantic blessings. Nothing worked. The clay remained gleaming defiantly under the midday sun. And then came the questions. Why us? Voices demanded. What curse has fallen? An old woman, her voice rasping from age, spoke what others had only dared to think. It is because of her. The girl. The gentle one. The square fell silent. She was painted last night with white clay. We laughed. We mocked. We watched her tears and none stopped the cruelty. Now the earth has remembered. Now the clay remembers. Her words spread faster than the plague itself. Eyes widened, some with guilt, others with anger. They turned their thoughts toward the stepmother and her daughter, who had led the humiliation. It was then that the stepmother emerged, her steps unsteady, her eyes wide with terror. Her face bore the deepest stains of all, thick white streaks across her cheeks like the mask of a corpse. Her hands shook as she raised them. It will not wash, she screamed, clawing at her skin until blood welled beneath her fingernails. I cannot rid myself of it. Behind her stumbled her daughter, the stepsister, her palms ghostly pale, her fingers smeared to the knuckles as though dipped in lime. She hid her hands behind her dress, weeping, but the villagers saw. They knew. See them, a voice cried. They brought this upon us. Accusations swelled. Some spat on the ground. Others cursed aloud. Yet even as the stepmother shouted back, defiant and shrill, her voice trembled. Fear was etched into her every movement. The girl they had mocked was nowhere to be seen. She had vanished into the forest, and now only her absence remained, heavy as a storm cloud. Children whispered, She is with the spirits. Men muttered, She has cursed us. Women crossed their arms and stared at the streaks that marred their own faces, shame twisting into dread. As the day dragged on, the village changed. No laughter rose, no songs were sung. People avoided looking into water, afraid of the pale reflection staring back. The square emptied, huts closed their doors, and silence stretched where once had been noise. By nightfall, fires burned low and fear clung thicker than the clay. Even the crickets seemed hushed. Mothers stroked their children's hair, whispering that tomorrow the marks would fade. But tomorrow came and the marks remained. Worse, they deepened. Where once there had been faint streaks, now there were bold smears, as though the clay itself spread slowly, inch by inch across the skin. Fingers turned pale. Brows and chins grew heavy with white. In the dim firelight, the villagers looked like spirits themselves, half claimed by the otherworld. The elders met in secret. This is no sickness, one said, his voice hoarse. It is punishment. But punishment for what? Another demanded, though they all knew the answer. For cruelty, the first replied. For shame cast upon an innocent. A third voice rose, trembling. If it is true, then only she can lift it. We must seek the girl. We must beg her forgiveness. But none knew where she had gone. The forest had swallowed her, and they feared to follow. So the whispers grew louder than ever. Mothers told children not to speak her name lest the clay grow thicker. Men carried water from the river, scrubbing until their arms bled, while women covered their faces with cloth, ashamed to be seen. The curse had begun and it would not release them. And though no one saw her, somewhere deep in the forest, the girl stood watching the sunrise break through the trees. The air touched her face softly, and for the first time in many nights she smiled, not in triumph but in peace. For she understood now. The clay had chosen where it belonged. The stepmother had always walked with her chin lifted, her voice sharp as flint, her gaze daring anyone to defy her. But now her proud carriage was broken. She stumbled through the village with a shawl pulled tight around her head, though the fabric could not hide the gleaming pallor that clung to her skin. Her face, once adorned with careful paint and polished beads, now looked like a skull, chalky, spectral, as if death itself had laid a hand upon her. Beside her, the stepsister fared no better. The clay had crept over her features like a mask, stark white across brow and cheeks, sinking into the lines of her lips until her smile looked grotesque. Her hands were worse still, stained completely pale. No cloth or glove could conceal them. They glowed like bones in the dim firelight. Day after day they tried to rid themselves of it. At first, they bathed in the river until their skin blistered from scrubbing. When that failed, the stepmother turned to remedies she had once mocked others for using. She ground bitter herbs, mixing them into paste that she smeared across her face until her flesh stung and burned. But when she washed it away, the white streaks stared back at her, sharper than before. In desperation, she pressed hot stones to her cheeks, scalding her skin, hoping the clay would peel away with the burns. She screamed, the air filled with the smell of singed flesh, but when she lifted her trembling hands to a bowl of water, the reflection showed the same ghostly mask, only now etched with red welts beneath. The stepsister wept as she tried her own methods. She pricked her fingers with needles, smeared her face with blood, hoping the clay would drink it and fade. But the crimson only sank into the pale surface, turning pink before fading back to white. Her cries rang through the night, chilling those who heard them. The villagers watched in silence at first, half in pity, half in fear. But pity did not last. For while the clay touched many, none bore it as heavily as the stepmother and her daughter. Their humiliation was undeniable, their punishment more severe. The whispers began again, this time harsher than before. "They are the root," someone muttered as the women passed by. It was their hands that smeared the girl. "The spirits have marked them worst of all." Where once neighbors had sought their favor, now doors closed when they approached. Gifts of food and firewood ceased. When they begged for remedies, few answered, and those who did offered only false comfort or herbs they knew would fail. The stepmother's power unraveled strand by strand, until she and her daughter stood isolated, ghosts among the living. At night their house echoed with wails. The stepmother clawed at her reflection in a shard of mirror, hurling it to the floor when it mocked her with its pale face. The stepsister hid beneath blankets, whispering prayers, promising to change, to repent, if only the curse would lift. But the clay did not lift. Instead it spread. By the end of the week, the stepmother's arms were streaked white to the elbows. Her daughter's legs showed pale patches like frostbite. Their very bodies were betraying them, as though the earth sought to strip away every layer of deceit and pride until nothing remained but their guilt. The villagers grew restless. They gathered in the square, their own streaks of clay faint compared to the ghastly pallor of the two women. Anger boiled in their voices. Why should we suffer for their cruelty? They mocked innocence. They brought this upon us. Let them answer for it before the ancestors. The stepmother heard these murmurs, and for the first time in her life, true terror seized her. She shut the door against the villagers, but still the whispers seeped in through the cracks, haunting her like the wind. She pressed her hands to her face, but the clay was cold beneath her fingers, as if her own skin no longer belonged to her. She dreamed of the girl, standing at the river, her face clean, her braids glimmering, her eyes calm and steady. Each time, the stepmother woke screaming, clutching at her sheets, for she knew the truth she dared not say aloud. The girl was free and she was not. And so she and her daughter cowered in their home, trapped not by walls but by the curse upon their flesh, while outside, the villagers' patience thinned. Fear had shifted to fury. The earth had spoken, and soon they would demand judgment. The river shimmered beneath the morning sun, its surface broken only by the slow current tugging at reeds along its banks. Villagers gathered there in uneasy silence, their faces streaked with faint traces of white clay. 4 days they had lived with the marks, scrubbing in vain, whispering their fears, blaming one another. But now, all their gazes turned to the figure who walked calmly down the path toward the water. It was her. The girl they had mocked, the one they had painted in clay to humiliate. She walked barefoot, her steps steady, her presence strangely radiant. Her scars, once the subject of cruel whispers, seemed softened by light, and her eyes carried no hatred, only a quiet strength that made many lower their heads in shame. A hush rippled through the crowd as she stepped to the water's edge. The river bent the sunlight into silver ribbons around her, as though the earth itself acknowledged her return. "You have called me cursed," she began, her voice clear but gentle. "You painted me white to mark me as impure, unworthy. You laughed as I trembled. But look at yourselves now." The villagers shifted uneasily. Mothers clutched children closer, men rubbed their stained cheeks with nervous hands. Every face in the crowd bore some trace of the clay's curse, streaks like scars, blotches like ash, pale hands that refused to darken no matter how hard they scrubbed. "This clay," she continued, her hand lifting a small lump of the white earth she had taken from the riverbank, "was meant to shame me. But it is not my shame you see. It is your truth. For the spirits do not mark the innocent, only the cruel." A murmur spread, voices trembling. Some nodded, tears in their eyes, realizing the weight of her words. Others turned, glaring at the stepmother and stepsister who stood apart, their faces pale as bone, their hands and arms nearly covered. Their punishment was visible to all, so much heavier, so much more damning. The stepmother tried to speak, her voice sharp but breaking. She lies. She twists this to her favor, but the villagers silenced her with a single collective glance. No one believed her anymore. The girl did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She turned toward the women who had wronged her, her gaze steady as the river's flow. You wish to strip me of dignity. You wish to make me less. But cruelty cannot be hidden. The clay does not cling to the innocent, it clings to those whose hearts are stained. A wind swept across the river, scattering droplets into the air. For an instant, the water reflected the crowd not as they were but as they had been on the festival night, laughing, pointing, mocking. The vision faded as quickly as it appeared, but the message struck deep. The villagers gasped, many falling to their knees. One of the elders, his voice trembling with age, spoke. We were blind. We joined in cruelty and called it celebration. The clay unmasks us and we cannot deny it. The heroine bent, dipping her hands into the water. The river did not stain her. Her reflection was clear, her skin clean. She rose, droplets glinting like jewels upon her arms. The earth remembers, she said softly. The ancestors see. This clay is not curse but truth. And truth will cling until hearts are changed. Her words settled heavy on the people. Some wept openly, covering their faces in shame. Others whispered apologies, not daring to approach her. The stepmother, wild-eyed, clawed at her cheeks, leaving red scratches that only deepened the ghastly white streaks. Her daughter sank to the ground, sobbing, as if crushed beneath the weight of judgment she could not escape. But the girl did not gloat, nor did she demand vengeance. She only stood tall at the river's edge, the sun bright behind her, as if her very presence was an answer to cruelty. The villagers understood then. The clay was not a punishment meant to destroy them. It was a mirror. By the time the crowd dispersed, whispers had changed. No longer were they about her shame. They were about her strength, her truth, her endurance. Some called her a daughter of the ancestors. Others said the river itself had chosen her to speak on its behalf. And as she turned to leave, white flowers bloomed along the riverbank where her bare feet had pressed into the soil, proof that her spirit, unlike the clay, could not be sullied. The year turned, and with it came the festival once more. Where once drums had sounded with malice and laughter had been sharpened into cruelty, now there was a hush of reverence. The villagers prepared differently this time. No longer did they grind the pale, mocking clay into bowls to smear upon one another's faces. Instead they gathered pigments from flowers, berries, bark and earth, red as fire, blue as sky, green as new leaves. Their fingers stained with color, they painted their cheeks and brows, marking joy, remembrance and resilience. It was said that the ancestors had turned their eyes upon them, and that the clay had been judgment. None dared deny it now. Too many faces remained streaked with ghostly white, untouched by pigment, as if the earth itself had marked them for their cruelty. The stepmother and stepsister hid in their hut, their skin pale as bone, unable to wash away the shame. They did not walk in daylight. When they crept out at night, children pointed, whispering of ghosts. Their punishment had no end, for the clay clung like a second skin. But the heroine, she returned to the heart of the village, walking with the dignity that had always been hers. She wore no paint, no mask of color. Her face was bare, radiant in its natural glow, more striking than any hue the villagers smeared upon themselves. Where once they had laughed at her tears, now they lowered their heads in respect as she passed. Drums began to beat, deep and slow, echoing the thrum of the earth. Women danced in circles, their faces lit with crimson and saffron, their feet stamping dust into the air. Children laughed, chasing one another with hands bright from crushed petals. Men sang old songs, the words carrying gratitude and sorrow both. And always in the center, their eyes followed her, the girl they had wronged, the girl who bore no stain. The elders approached her, robes brushed with strokes of blue and gold, and bowed their heads. Daughter of the ancestors, they said, forgive our blindness. It was your strength, not ours, that saved us from our own cruelty. She did not speak at once. She stood still, the hum of drums around her, the scent of smoke and flowers in the air. Then she lifted her chin, her voice calm as flowing water. The clay is truth, she said. It shows what is hidden in the heart. Those who mocked will wear their own shame no matter how many years pass. But those who seek to change, perhaps the earth will show them mercy in time. The people wept, for her words carried neither vengeance nor triumph, only justice. They reached for her hands not to drag her into shame but to honor her. They led her into the dance, a place she had once been forbidden. And so, beneath the wide sky, she moved among them. Light shimmered across her hair, her steps slow and certain. Wherever she passed, laughter softened, voices hushed, until all that remained was the steady beat of drums. The villagers painted their faces in living colors, but hers remained unpainted, proof that she needed no mark to shine. As the sun set, torches were lit, firelight flickering across faces both bright and pale. Among the crowd, the marked ones stood apart, their white streaks glowing unnaturally in the dark. They shrank from sight, unable to join the dance. But the heroine walked unafraid, a figure of grace among them, her presence both haunting and holy. And when the final drumbeat faded into the night, a silence settled like a blessing. The villagers looked to her one last time as she walked slowly through the festival ground, her bare face gleaming in the torchlight. Around her, shadows stretched long, and in their shifting shapes, some swore they saw ancestral figures moving with her, watching, guarding, reminding. The clay had been meant to break her, but it had become the seal of her strength. The cruel bore it forever while she walked free. And so the tale was told, that in every dawn her steps echoed through the village, her clean face a mirror of resilience, her light a warning to those who would mock or wound. No one forgot. For the white clay clung to those who had tried to shame her, but she was the dawn itself.